The alarm hit every deck of the flagship at the same instant, and I dropped my meal tray before the first pulse finished screaming through the corridor. I had served aboard the Kelvon's Wrath for 11 years, and I had never heard that particular tone. It was not a drill signal. It was not a proximity warning. It was the deep-range anomaly alert, the one they programmed into every Rishon warship but never expected to use, because it meant something impossibly large had just appeared where nothing should exist. I ran. My boots hammered the metal deck plates as I sprinted toward the tactical command center on the upper ring. Other officers were already converging from every direction, their faces tight with confusion. Nobody spoke. When that alarm sounds, you move first and ask questions after you arrive. The command center was already crowded when I pushed through the door. Fleet Archon Drael Kennis stood at the center of the room, with his hands clasped behind his back, staring at the primary tactical display like he was trying to burn a hole through it with his eyes. Drael was a tall, rigid officer, with a reputation for never showing surprise. But I had known him long enough to read the tension in his jaw, and the way his crest had flattened tight against his skull. "Commander Sorn," he said without turning, "look at this, and tell me what I am seeing." I stepped up to the display and felt my stomach drop. The deep-range sensors were painting a cluster of energy signatures at the far edge of our patrol zone. Right along the border of the region, every star map in the Dominion simply labels as the Silence. That alone would have been unusual. What made it alarming was the scale. Each signature was enormous, far larger than anything our sensors were calibrated to classify. The computer had flagged them as geological formations because it had no military profile that matched. "Those are not asteroids," I said. "No," Drael agreed. "They are not." The Silence was exactly what the name suggested. It was a vast stretch of space on the trailing edge of the galactic arm, where no Reshan expedition had ever returned from. We had sent probes, we had sent scout ships, we had sent, once, an entire exploration flotilla of 40 vessels under the command of a decorated admiral. None of them came back. No wreckage was ever found. No distress signals were ever received. The ships simply crossed into that region of space and ceased to exist. Over the centuries, the disappearances had bred stories. Traders who worked the border routes whispered about strange signals they had picked up, transmissions in languages no translator could parse. Retired navigators told tales of ghost ships glimpsed at extreme sensor range, vessels of impossible design that moved without engine signatures. And always, there were the stories about the creatures. Bipedal, warm-blooded, endoskeletal, with their bones on the inside and their soft skin on the outside, and forward-facing eyes like predators. They called them humans. I had grown up hearing those stories. Every Reshnan child did. They were the kind of tales you told around a heating unit during cold season, meant to make hatchlings gasp and huddle closer together. Humans were the monsters in the dark. Humans were the reason you did not fly past the border markers. Humans were the myth that kept young pilots from doing something foolish. The official position of the Reshan Dominion was clear and absolute. Humans did not exist. They were folklore, superstition. There was no evidence of any intelligent species occupying the Silence, and the disappearance of ships in that region was attributable to navigational hazards, subspace anomalies, and the natural dangers of unexplored territory. I had always accepted that position. I was a military officer. I dealt in sensor data and firing solutions, not ghost stories. But standing in that command center, staring at energy signatures that dwarfed our largest warship, I felt something I had not felt since I was a child, listening to old Thessic tell stories about the dark beyond the border. I felt afraid. "I want a patrol squadron assembled within the hour," Drael announced to the room. 12 ships. Commander Sorn will serve as tactical lead. We will investigate these signatures, identify their source, and report back to Dominion Command. I opened my mouth to ask a question, but Drael's eyes found mine, and the warning in them was unmistakable. He was not interested in discussion. He wanted compliance. So I complied. Thessic found me in the corridor as I was heading to the squadron briefing room. He was old, the oldest active navigator in the fleet, with a scarred face and milky patches spreading across his left eye. He had been serving on warships since before I was hatched, and he had a habit of appearing exactly when you did not want to see him, carrying exactly the kind of information you did not want to hear. "You are going into the silence," he said. It was not a question. "We are investigating an anomaly at the border," I corrected him. "We are not crossing into anything." Thesic made a sound that might have been a laugh. "My grandfather served on the border patrol 60 years ago. He intercepted a transmission once, from deep inside the silence. It was in no language any Rishiman system could translate. Just a voice, calm and steady, speaking words that meant nothing to him. And then weapons fire, energy discharge on frequencies our instruments could not even properly record. He said the readings burned out 3 sensor arrays before the communications officer managed to shut down the receiver." "Your grandfather told good stories," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "My grandfather was not a storyteller," Thesic replied. "He was a navigator who spent 40 years recording everything he encountered in space. He logged that transmission, filed it with Dominion Command. They classified it and told him it never happened." He paused. "Be careful out there, Commander." I told him I would be careful. I told myself his story was just another piece of the myth, another thread in the tapestry of nonsense that had grown around the silence over the centuries. I almost believed it. The patrol squadron launched on schedule, 12 warships in standard reconnaissance formation, with the Kelvon's Wrath holding the center position. I stood at the tactical station on the bridge and watched the stars shift as we accelerated toward the border zone. The journey would take several hours at cruising speed, and I used that time to review every piece of data we had on the silence. It was not much. Sensor logs showed normal space in every direction. No unusual radiation, no gravitational anomalies. No reason at all for ships to vanish. That was what bothered me most. If there had been a natural hazard, we would have found evidence of it by now. The fact that there was nothing, absolutely nothing, suggested that whatever was in the silence was very good at not being found. We crossed the last navigation buoy at the border and entered unclaimed space. For the first 30 minutes, everything was normal. Then our long-range communications began to degrade. It was subtle at first, a slight delay in signal relay, a faint haze of static on the secondary channels. But within an hour, our ability to communicate with Dominion Command had dropped by 40% and was still falling. "It is not jamming," my communications officer reported, her voice tight with confusion. "There is no jamming signal. Something is simply absorbing our transmissions. I have never seen anything like this." Neither had I. We pressed deeper into the border zone, and that was when the sensors found the wreckage. It was scattered across a wide debris field, tumbling slowly in the void. Fragments of hull plating, shattered engine housings, the twisted remains of antenna arrays and weapons mounts. My sensor operator identified the alloy composition within seconds, and the result sent a chill through the entire bridge. Vale Corey. The wreckage belonged to the Vale Corey exploration fleet that had vanished 40 years ago. 40 ships, 900 crew members, gone without a trace. And here they were, or what was left of them, drifting in the dark like a warning monument. I ordered the squadron to slow and began analyzing the debris. The damage patterns were unlike anything in our combat database. Every piece of wreckage showed the same type of injury. Clean, precise cuts through hull plating, as if someone had drawn lines of pure energy across the ships and separated them into sections. There was no blast scoring, no fragmentation damage, no indication of explosive weapons or kinetic impacts. Whatever had destroyed these ships had done so with a precision that made our most advanced weapons look like crude hammers. "Commander," my sensor operator said quietly, "I am reading residual energy traces on the wreckage. They match no known weapons profile in any Rishan database." I stared at the data on my screen and felt the silence of the bridge pressing against my ears. Every officer on that bridge was thinking the same thing, but no one was willing to say it out loud. I was about to order the squadron to collect samples when every ship in the formation received the same transmission simultaneously. It came through on all channels at once, cutting through the signal degradation, as if it did not exist. The voice was calm, measured, and it spoke in rough but functional Rishan trade language, with an accent I had never heard before. "You have entered protected space. Identify yourselves and state your intentions. You have 1 cycle to comply." The bridge went absolutely silent. I looked at my communications officer. She looked back at me with wide eyes and shook her head slowly. She had not been able to pinpoint the source of the transmission, but my sensor operator had. "Commander," he whispered, "the source of that transmission is directly behind us." I turned to the tactical display and felt every muscle in my body lock rigid. 3 ship signatures had appeared in the space between our squadron and the border we had just crossed. They had not come from anywhere. They had not dropped out of faster-than-light travel. They had simply appeared, as if they had been there the entire time and had only now chosen to let us see them. Each one was massive. The smallest of the 3 was nearly twice the size of our flagship. The energy readings pouring off their hulls were so intense that our sensors could barely process them, and the tactical computer was cycling through classification after classification without finding a match, each estimate more alarming than the last. I stared at those 3 signatures on the display, and the old stories roared through my mind like a flood breaking through a dam. Bipedal creatures, forward-facing eyes, ships that appeared from nowhere. The myth was behind us, and it was waiting for an answer. I had exactly 1 cycle to respond to the transmission, and that cycle was already half gone by the time I turned to Fleet Archon Drael Kennis for orders. He stood at the center of the bridge with his crest fully raised, which in any other context would have signified confidence and authority. But I could see his hands trembling at his sides, and the color had drained from the skin around his throat. He was afraid. He was more afraid than I had ever seen him. But fear in a Russian officer does not produce caution. It produces aggression. "Charge all weapons batteries," Drael ordered. His voice was steady enough, but the words came too fast, tumbling over each other. "Bring the squadron into defensive formation. Whatever those ships are, they will not dictate terms to a Russian patrol." "Archon," I said, keeping my tone as level as I could manage. "The energy readings from those vessels are beyond anything in our classification systems. We should at least respond to their communication before we escalate." "They are scavengers," Drael snapped. "Border pirates with oversized hulls and intimidation tactics. I have seen this before." He had not seen this before. No one had seen this before. I knew it, and every officer on that bridge knew it. But Drael had given an order, and in the Russian military, you follow orders from your Archon, or you face a tribunal. The squadron shifted into a tight defensive sphere, weapons batteries humming as they reached full charge. I watched the tactical display with a feeling of slow, creeping dread. The 3 unknown vessels had not moved. They hung in the void like monuments, blocking our retreat path with the casual certainty of predators who knew their prey had nowhere to go. The 1-cycle deadline passed. The calm voice came again, same channel, same measured tone. "Your compliance window has closed. We note weapons charging across your formation. We strongly advise against hostile action. This is your final advisory." Drael's jaw tightened. "Fire a warning volley. Full plasma spread, wide dispersal. Show them we are not intimidated." The weapons officer hesitated for just a fraction of a second, then executed the command. 12 Russian warships fired simultaneously, sending a wall of superheated plasma bolts streaking across the gap between our formation and the unknown vessels. It was a standard intimidation tactic, designed to demonstrate firepower without actually targeting the enemy ships. The plasma bolts crossed half the distance. Then they simply ceased to exist. There was no impact, no deflection, no explosion. The bolts reached an invisible boundary approximately 300 units from the nearest unknown vessel, and they vanished. Every single one. Our sensors recorded no energy dispersal, no absorption signature, no residual heat. The plasma rounds were there one moment and gone the next, as if someone had reached into the fabric of space and erased them. The bridge fell into a stunned silence that lasted 3 full heartbeats. I heard someone behind me make a small, choked sound of disbelief. A 3rd transmission arrived. "Warning shot noted. That was your one courtesy. Identify or be disabled." Drael's face had gone rigid. I could see the conflict behind his eyes, the pride warring with the first real understanding that he was in a situation beyond his control. For one moment, I thought he might listen to reason. I thought he might open a channel and respond to the communication like a rational commander. Instead, he turned to the weapons officer and said, "Full broadside, all ships. Target the lead vessel and fire everything we have." "Archon, please," I said. and I did not care that I was bordering on insubordination. We do not know what we are dealing with. Those ships neutralized our plasma rounds without any visible defensive system. If we attack, we have no idea what their response will be. Their response is irrelevant, Drael said coldly. We are the Reshan Dominion. We do not cower before unknowns. All ships, fire. 12 warships unleashed everything they carried. Plasma batteries, kinetic lances, torpedo spreads, particle beams. The full arsenal of a Reshan patrol squadron, enough firepower to crack the crust of a small moon, screamed across the void toward the 3 unknown vessels. What happened next took less than 90 seconds, and it changed everything I believed about power, about technology, and about the universe I thought I understood. The unknown vessels responded, not with overwhelming force, not with a wall of return fire designed to obliterate our squadron. They responded with precision so exact, so impossibly controlled, that it felt less like combat and more like surgery. The lead vessel emitted a series of thin, brilliant energy beams that moved so fast my tactical display could barely track them. Each beam found its target with perfect accuracy. Weapons arrays were severed from hulls as cleanly as if cut by a laser scalpel. Power conduits to torpedo launchers were burned through at exactly the right points to disable them without triggering the warheads. Plasma battery cooling systems were pierced with single shots that caused them to safely vent and shut down rather than overload. The second vessel dealt with our engines. It released a pulse that I can only describe as a wave of targeted interference. It passed through our shields as if they did not exist, found every engine core in the squadron, and locked them into emergency shutdown. Ships that had been maneuvering at combat speed suddenly went dead in space, drifting on residual momentum. The third vessel handled our shields and communications. A single, sustained beam swept across our formation and collapsed every defensive barrier in the squadron simultaneously. Our shields did not overload. They did not flicker. They simply switched off, as if someone had reached inside each ship and pulled the power coupling. 90 seconds. 12 Reshan warships, the pride of a Dominion patrol, reduced from a combat-ready formation to a collection of drifting, helpless hulls. And in those 90 seconds, not a single crew member aboard any of our ships was harmed. Not one. That was the part that frightened me most. Any sufficiently advanced enemy could destroy you. But to disarm an entire squadron in under 2 minutes without causing a single casualty required a level of technological superiority that I could not comprehend. It meant they had not merely outgunned us. They had understood our ships so completely, so intimately, that they knew exactly where to strike, to disable every system, without endangering anyone aboard. We were helpless. We were at their mercy, and we had attacked them. The silence on the bridge was absolute. Drael stood frozen at his station, his crest flat against his skull, his hands gripping the rail in front of him so tightly that I could hear his joints cracking. Around him, officers stared at dead consoles and dark displays, unable to process what had just happened. Then the lead unknown vessel opened a bay on its forward hull, and a small craft detached and began crossing the void toward our flagship. It moved smoothly, without urgency, as if the beings inside it had all the time in the universe. Because they did. The shuttle docked at our primary airlock with a precision that our own pilots would have envied. There was a hiss of pressure equalization, then the inner door opened, and they stepped aboard. I will never forget that moment for as long as I live. There were 4 of them. They were bipedal, just like the stories said. They stood on 2 legs with a posture that was straighter and more rigid than any Reshan, and they moved with a fluid, balanced gait that suggested powerful musculature beneath their clothing. Their skin was smooth and soft-looking, lacking any scales or protective plating. Their eyes faced forward, both of them aimed in the same direction like the eyes of a hunting predator, and those eyes moved constantly, scanning the corridor, cataloging exits, evaluating every Ration crew member they passed with a quick, sharp intelligence that made my skin prickle. They were real. Everything the myths had described, every detail that I had dismissed as superstition and fiction, was standing in front of me wearing armored suits and carrying sidearms. The one in front was a female of their species, shorter than the others but carrying herself with an authority that required no physical size to enforce. Her face was weathered and marked with thin lines of healed damage. Her hair was cut short and had gone partially gray. Her eyes were the color of deep water, and when they found mine, I felt as if I were being weighed and measured in a single glance. "I am Captain Lena Hargrove," she said, in Rishon trade language that was rough, but perfectly understandable. "United Earth Territorial Navy, you have entered Earth's outer defensive perimeter." She paused and let those words fill the corridor. "I need to speak with whoever is in command of this fleet. Immediately." I looked at Drael. He was staring at the humans with an expression I had never seen on his face before. It was not just fear. It was the look of someone whose entire understanding of reality had just been dismantled in 90 seconds. "I am Fleet Archon Drael Kennis," he managed, "commander of this patrol." Hargrove studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Under the terms of our territorial defense protocols, that is classified as an act of aggression. However, since no damage was sustained by our vessels, we are prepared to treat this as a misunderstanding if you can provide a satisfactory explanation." Her tone was calm, professional, and entirely devoid of fear. She spoke to the commander of 12 warships as if she were addressing a minor administrative issue. And the most unsettling part was that given what her ships had just demonstrated, that assessment was probably accurate. Hargrove explained what the outer defensive perimeter was. Humanity, she told us, had established contact with other galactic species over 300 years ago. Those early contacts had gone badly. Every species they encountered had attacked them, either out of fear or out of a desire to claim their territory and resources. The humans had fought back. They had won. Every single time, they had won. But winning, she said, had cost them. Not just in lives and resources, but in what it did to them as a people. Each war had been more destructive than the last, and with each victory, humanity had developed more devastating weapons, more efficient tactics, more ruthless strategies. They looked at what they were becoming and decided to stop. They retreated, not because they were afraid, but because they recognized that if they continued to meet hostility with force, they would eventually become the very monsters their enemies believed them to be. They established the perimeter. They sealed their borders. They made it clear that anyone who entered their space uninvited would be turned back, and anyone who attacked would be stopped. And then they went silent. For 200 years, humanity had watched the galaxy from behind its border, content to be forgotten. They had hoped that given enough time, the stories about them would fade. They would become legends, then myths, then nothing at all. And for the most part, that strategy had worked. Until we showed up. Hargrove's expression darkened as she delivered her final piece of information. "Archon Kennis, our deep-range sensors have detected a large Reshon fleet formation approaching this sector at high speed. Approximately 300 warships. They will arrive at the perimeter within 18 hours. I felt ice spread through my chest. 300 warships. That was not a patrol. That was not a reconnaissance force. That was an armada. I turned to Drael, and I saw it in his eyes before he could hide it. He had known. He had planned this. The patrol was never a simple investigation. It was bait, a forward element designed to locate and provoke whatever was in the silence, while a full battle fleet moved into position behind it. Drael had contacted Dominion Command before we even launched, and requested a massive reinforcement fleet, presenting this mission as a conquest opportunity, disguised as reconnaissance. "Archon," I said slowly, "what have you done?" Drael said nothing. He did not need to. The answer was written across his face, plain as ship markings on a hull. He had brought a war fleet to the doorstep of a civilization that could disable 12 warships in 90 seconds without breaking a sweat. And that fleet was already on its way. Hargrove watched our exchange with those cold, deep-water eyes. "If that fleet crosses our perimeter," she said quietly, "Earth will consider it an act of war. And I need you to understand something very clearly, Archon. You do not want Earth to go to war." The guards Drael posted outside my quarters were young, barely a year out of the military academy. I could see the uncertainty in their posture, the way they kept glancing at each other, as if hoping the other one had a better understanding of what was happening than they did. They did not. Nobody aboard the Kelvon's Wrath understood what was happening, except possibly Drael himself, and his understanding was colored by a pride so rigid and so blind that it had turned into something indistinguishable from madness. He had confined me to quarters within an hour of Hargrove's departure. The official charge was insubordination, which was technically accurate. I had questioned his orders on the bridge, challenged his judgment in front of the crew, and made it clear through my tone and my words that I believed he was leading us toward catastrophe. In the Reshan military, that is more than enough to earn confinement. But the real reason Drael locked me away was simpler and more dangerous than any breach of protocol. I had seen Hargrove's face when she spoke about the incoming armada. I had heard the quiet weight in her voice when she said that Earth did not want to go to war. And unlike Drael, I had understood what she was not saying. She was not threatening us. She was warning us. There is a difference between those two things that some officers never learn to recognize, and Drael was one of them. I paced my quarters and tried to think. The Reshan Armada, 300 warships strong, was less than 18 hours from crossing into human space. Drael had already transmitted a message to the Armada before he confined me. I did not know exactly what that message said, but I could guess. He would have described the humans as hostile primitives who had ambushed his patrol. He would have painted the encounter as an unprovoked attack, justifying a massive military response. He would have told the Armada exactly what it needed to hear to come in weapons, hot and ready for a fight. If that fleet engaged the humans, what I had witnessed today would look like a gentle handshake. The humans had disabled 12 ships with surgical precision and 0 casualties. That restraint had been a choice, not a limitation. And 300 warships pouring into their territory, with weapons blazing, would almost certainly convince them that restraint was no longer an appropriate response. I needed to warn the Armada. I needed to send a counter-message, something that told the incoming captains the truth about what we had encountered, before Drael's lies drove them into a war they could not win. But I was locked in my quarters with 2 guards outside my door, and no access to the ship's communication systems. I sat on the edge of my sleeping platform and closed my eyes. I thought about the wreckage we had found in the debris field. Those Veil-Kori ships had been cut apart with the same precision the humans had used on our weapons arrays. 40 ships, 900 crew members, erased from existence by a civilization so advanced that our best technology registered as background noise to their sensors. The door chimed. I opened my eyes to find Thesic standing in the doorway, his scarred face unreadable. Behind him, the 2 young guards were staring straight ahead with the rigid, uncomfortable posture of soldiers who had been given a new order by someone with enough rank to override their current instructions. "How did you get past them?" I asked. "I told them I was delivering navigational charts that you requested before your confinement," Thesic said, stepping inside and letting the door close behind him. They did not question a senior navigator carrying data tablets. Young officers never do. "Thesic, if Drael finds out you are here, he will have you confined as well." "Commander, if we do not find a way to contact that armada, confinement will be the least of anyone's concerns." The old navigator pulled a chair close to my sleeping platform and sat down with the careful movements of someone whose joints had been complaining for decades. "I have been speaking with the engineering staff, quietly. They are frightened, Commander. Every one of them saw what those 3 ships did to us. They have been running the sensor data over and over, trying to find some explanation for how our shields were collapsed, how our engines were locked, how our weapons were severed from our hulls without a single power surge or hull breach. They cannot explain any of it." "Neither can I admitted. "There are 6 other senior officers aboard this ship who share your assessment of the situation," Thesic continued. "Lieutenant Commander Revan in engineering, Lieutenant Nasara on the sensor deck, 4 section chiefs who were on duty during the engagement. They all saw the same thing you saw. They all reached the same conclusion. And what conclusion is that?" Thesic looked at me with his one good eye. "That if the Armada crosses into human space with hostile intentions, we will be witnessing the end of the Reshanan Dominion as a military power." The words hung in the air between us. They were not dramatic. They were not emotional. They were the calm, measured assessment of an old soldier who had spent a lifetime reading tactical situations, and they carried a weight that made my chest tight. There is an auxiliary communication bay on Deck 14, Thesic said. It is normally used for maintenance diagnostics and ship-to-dock transmissions. It has its own power supply and its own antenna array, separate from the primary communication systems that Drael has locked down. If we can reach it, we can send a message directly to the Armada. Drael will have posted security throughout the ship. He has, but he is focused on the command deck and the primary systems. Deck 14 is in the lower engineering section, and right now, every one of Drael's attention is pointed outward at those 3 human ships. He is not thinking about an internal communication attempt. I looked at the old navigator, at his scarred face and his clouded eye, and the absolute steady conviction in his expression. He had been in the service longer than I had been alive. He had survived engagements, border skirmishes, and 2 full-scale fleet actions. He was not a reckless officer. If he was proposing this, it meant he believed, with the certainty of a lifetime's experience, that it was necessary. "Who else is with us?" I asked. "Ravon will meet us at the engineering access junction on Deck 12. Nassara will monitor internal sensors from her station and alert us if security patrols change their routes. The section chiefs will create minor diversions on the upper decks if we need them." I stood up. "Then let us go." Getting to Deck 14 took nearly 20 minutes of careful movement through maintenance corridors and service tunnels that most crew members never used. Thesic navigated them from memory, leading me through narrow passages between hull plating and interior walls, where the air was warm and thick with the smell of coolant and recycled atmosphere. Twice we heard the footsteps of security patrols passing nearby, and both times we pressed ourselves against the walls and waited until they faded. Rivon was waiting at the engineering junction as promised, a tall, thin officer with nervous hands and a sharp mind. She had already bypassed the security lock on the Deck 14 access hatch and had a direct pathway cleared to the auxiliary communication bay. "The system is functional," Rivon reported as we moved through the lower engineering section. "I ran a diagnostic remotely. The antenna array has enough range to reach the Armada if we boost the signal through the secondary power grid." "How long will we have before Drael's people detect the transmission?" I asked. "Depends on the message length. A short burst, maybe 90 seconds before it shows up on the communication monitoring logs. A long message, less time. Then we make it short." We reached the auxiliary bay, and Rivon brought the system online. The console flickered to life, casting a cold blue glow across our faces. I composed the message in my head as Revamon prepared the transmission protocols, choosing every word with care. I identified myself by rank and authorization code. I stated clearly that Fleet Archon Drael's report was false. I described what had actually happened. I told the Armada that the patrol squadron had been disabled in 90 seconds by 3 vessels that were among the smallest in the human fleet. I told them that the humans had demonstrated technology so far beyond ours that the engagement was not a battle, but a demonstration. I told them that attacking human space with 300 warships would not be a war. It would be an extinction event for every crew member in the Armada. I told them to stop. Rivon transmitted the message. The signal went out in a compressed burst, punching through the strange absorption field that had been degrading our communications, aimed directly at the Armada's projected approach vector. "Transmission complete," Rivon said. "I am reading partial confirmation receipts from multiple ships in the Armada. At least 40 vessels have acknowledged receiving the signal. 40 out of 300. It was not enough, but it was something." Then the communication monitoring system caught up. An alarm shrieked through the lower decks. Rivon's console flashed red as the ship's security network flagged our transmission and pinpointed its origin. We had been found. "We need to leave," Thesic said. "Now." But it was too late to run. Heavy footsteps thundered in the corridor outside the auxiliary bay, and the door crashed open to reveal a squad of Drael's security officers, weapons drawn, with the Archon himself standing behind them. Drael looked at me, then at the communication console, then back at me. His expression was unreadable, but his crest was flattened so tight against his skull that it looked painted on. "Commander Sorn," he said quietly, "you are hereby charged with mutiny. Take her back to confinement. Full restraints." They dragged me out of the auxiliary bay while Drael ordered Revon's console destroyed. As the guards hauled me through the corridor, I caught Thesic's eye. The old navigator gave me the smallest nod, barely perceptible, and then security took him as well. In my quarters, restrained and under heavy guard, I stared at the ceiling and tried to calculate how many captains in the Armada had received my message. 40 confirmed receipts, but possibly more. Some of those captains would question Drael's version of events. Some would be cautious, would slow their approach, would demand verification before engaging an unknown enemy. But the majority, the ones who had not received my transmission, or who chose to trust the word of a fleet archon over a confined commander, would follow orders. They would enter human space with weapons charged and blood burning, and they would discover exactly what I had discovered in those 90 seconds of absolute helplessness. I was still running those calculations when my personal communicator, which the guards had not thought to confiscate, vibrated silently against my wrist. I glanced down at the tiny screen and saw a text-only message on a frequency I did not recognize. Commander Sorn, this is Captain Hargrove. We have been monitoring your ship's internal communications. We know what you attempted. We know about the Armada. We need to talk. Private channel. Frequency follows. I stared at the message for a long time. The humans had been listening to everything. Every order Drael gave, every transmission, every internal alarm. They had been inside our systems the entire time, watching and listening with a capability that made our own signals intelligence look like children playing with toys. I activated the private channel. Hargrove's voice came through, low and steady. Commander, I am going to be direct with you, because we do not have much time. We have been observing the Reshan Dominion for decades. We know your fleet capabilities, your political structure, your history of expansion into the territories of weaker species. We chose not to intervene because you never crossed our perimeter. Now you have. The Armada is not my doing, I said. Drael arranged it before we launched. He presented this mission as a conquest opportunity. We know. We intercepted his original communication to your Dominion command. The request for reinforcements was sent before your patrol even departed your home system. Hargrove paused. Commander, I am going to tell you something, and I need you to understand that I am not saying it to frighten you. I am saying it because you appear to be the only rational officer in your fleet, and you deserve to know what your people are walking into. I braced myself. The 3 vessels that disabled your squadron are Sentinel-class light patrol corvettes. They are the smallest operational warship in the United Earth Territorial Navy. They are designed for border monitoring and customs enforcement. Their crews number 47 each. Another pause. Earth's defensive fleet in this sector alone consists of over 2,000 warships. Among them are Dreadnought-class vessels that carry more firepower than your entire armada combined. The 3 ships you encountered today represent approximately 0.1% of our deployed naval strength in this region of space. I closed my eyes. The numbers washed over me like cold water, and I felt something break loose inside my chest. We had attacked customs enforcement boats. We had fired on the human equivalent of harbor patrol, and we had been utterly defeated in under 2 minutes. And now 300 warships were bearing down on a fleet of over 2,000. The Armada has to be stopped, I said. Yes, Hargrove agreed. It does. The Armada dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the precise coordinates Drael had transmitted, a region of space that 18 hours ago had been empty and unremarkable. 300 Reshan warships materialized in a staggered formation that stretched across thousands of units, their hulls still radiating the residual heat of high-speed transit. It was the largest Dominion battle group assembled in a generation, and from the bridge of the Kelvan's Wrath, where Drael had ordered me brought under guard to witness what he called a historic moment, it looked like the fist of a god preparing to strike. Drael had restored minimal power to the flagship systems, enough to receive and transmit on military channels. He wanted me to see this. He wanted me to understand that my warning had been futile, that the might of the Reshian Dominion could not be deterred by 3 oversized patrol boats with clever weapons. The Armada immediately began charging weapons and broadcasting dominance signals on all frequencies, the standard Reshian protocol for entering hostile territory. It was a display of power designed to intimidate lesser species into submission. Drael stood at the center of the bridge, his crest raised, his posture rigid with vindication. He believed he was about to conquer the unknown. I watched the tactical display and waited. For nearly a full minute, nothing happened. The armada held formation. The dominant signals echoed into the void. Space was quiet. Then it was not. They appeared everywhere at once. Not 3 ships. Not 30. Not even 300. The human fleet materialized across the entire sector in a coordinated decloaking that happened so simultaneously, so perfectly synchronized, that it registered on our sensors as a single event. One moment the Rishan Armada was alone in open space. The next moment it was surrounded. I tried to count the ships on the tactical display, but the computer was struggling to keep up. The signatures kept multiplying as more and more human vessels revealed themselves, each one broadcasting enough energy to white out our sensor arrays at close range. The final count, when the computer managed to stabilize, was 2,147 warships. Among them were vessels of a class I had never imagined could exist. Dreadnoughts, Hargrove had called them. On the tactical display, they appeared as signatures so large that the computer initially classified them as space stations. Each one was over 30 times the length of our flagship, with weapons arrays visible even at extreme range, bristling from every surface like the spines of some vast predatory creature. Our sensors reported that several of the larger dreadnoughts were generating their own measurable gravitational fields. They were so massive that they bent the fabric of space around them. 300 Rishan warships, surrounded on every axis by over 2,000 human warships, with dreadnoughts positioned at the cardinal points like anchors holding a net closed. The bridge of the Kelvan's wrath went silent. Every officer, every technician, every crew member who could see a display screen stopped moving. I watched Drael's crest slowly flatten against his skull as the full scope of what he was looking at registered in his mind. Then a transmission filled every speaker on every Reshan ship simultaneously. The voice was deep, male, and spoke Reshan trade language with a fluency that suggested years of study. "This is Admiral Victor Castillo of the United Earth Territorial Navy. You are in violation of sovereign human space. You have 60 seconds to power down weapons and surrender your fleet. There will be no second warning. The clock starts now." The armada fractured instantly. The captains who had received my earlier warning, at least 40 ships, began powering down their weapons immediately. Their captains had seen my message. They had heard my description of what 3 human patrol boats had done to 12 Reshan warships. They looked at the 2,000 ships surrounding them and made the only rational decision available. But the rest of the armada had not received my warning, and they were operating on Drael's version of events. Drael, who was now screaming into the fleet communication channel, ordering every ship to hold formation and engage the enemy. His voice had gone shrill, cracking with a mixture of rage and terror that no amount of command authority could disguise. "These are primitives," he shouted. "Savages hiding behind large hulls. They cannot stand against the combined might of the Rishan Dominion. All ships, fire. Fire everything." Roughly half the armada obeyed. 150 warships opened fire simultaneously, sending a tidal wave of plasma, kinetic rounds, and torpedoes streaking toward the nearest human vessels. The human fleet responded. I want to be very precise about what happened next, because the word battle implies some degree of mutual engagement, and what took place in the following 4 minutes was not a battle. It was a demonstration of such overwhelming technological superiority that calling it a fight would be like calling a thunderstorm a negotiation with the ground. The human warships moved with coordinated precision that bordered on beautiful. Not a single ship operated independently. They moved as a single organism, each vessel occupying exactly the right position at exactly the right moment, as if 2,000 captains shared a single mind. The incoming Reshan weapons fire was neutralized by the same invisible boundary I had witnessed earlier, bolts and rounds and torpedoes simply ceasing to exist as they approached the human hulls. Not one weapon made contact. Then the humans began their systematic disassembly of every attacking Rishan ship. Energy beams of blinding intensity swept across the formation, targeting weapons arrays with the same surgical precision I had witnessed before, but scaled up to an almost incomprehensible degree. Ships lost their forward batteries in the first pass. Their missile tubes went dark in the second. Their kinetic accelerators were cut from their hulls in the third. Each cut was clean, precise, and made at exactly the point that would disable the weapon without rupturing the hull or endangering the crew. Engines were next. The electromagnetic pulse technique the humans had used on our patrol squadron was deployed here on a massive scale, a wave of targeted interference that washed across the attacking ships and locked every engine core into emergency shutdown. 150 warships went dead in space within seconds, their momentum carrying them forward on drift alone. Ships that attempted ramming maneuvers were caught in gravitational fields projected by the dreadnoughts, invisible hands that gripped them, slowed them, and redirected them away from their targets, with the casual ease of an adult redirecting a charging child. The captured ships tumbled slowly through space, their engines dead, their weapons severed, their crews unharmed but utterly helpless. 4 minutes, 150 warships disabled, 0 casualties on either side. The ships that had surrendered were not touched. They drifted untouched within the human formation, their powered-down systems confirming their compliance, and not a single human weapon was aimed in their direction. I stood on the bridge of the Kelvon's Wrath and watched the tactical display update in real time, ship after ship after ship, shifting from active to disabled, and I felt something I had never experienced before. It was not fear, it was not awe, it was the profound, humbling recognition that we had been children playing at war, and the adults had just walked into the room. Drayle had stopped shouting. He stood at his station with his mouth open and his crest completely flattened, staring at the display as his armada was taken apart around him. His hands hung at his sides. The rage had drained out of him, replaced by something hollow and broken. I moved. The guards assigned to watch me had abandoned their posts the moment the human fleet appeared. They were at the viewports, staring out at the impossible ships that surrounded us. Nobody was paying attention to me. I crossed the bridge to the communication station and entered my tactical authority codes. The system accepted them. In the chaos, nobody had thought to revoke my access. I opened a fleet-wide channel and broadcast on every frequency the Armada used. My voice filled every bridge, every corridor, every compartment in 300 Reshon warships. All ships, this is Commander Valith Sorn, tactical lead of the forward patrol. Fleet Archon Dral's report to Dominion Command was falsified. This mission was not authorized as a reconnaissance patrol. It was an unsanctioned conquest operation based on fraudulent intelligence. The entities we have encountered are the military forces of a civilization called humanity, and their technological capabilities exceed anything in the Rishon arsenal by orders of magnitude that our science cannot yet calculate. I paused, letting the words sink in. I am issuing a fleet-wide stand-down order under emergency tactical authority. All ships, power down weapons immediately. Do not attempt to flee. Do not attempt to engage. Comply with human instructions, and trust that their restraint so far has been a choice, not a limitation. Across the formation, ships began responding. Those that were still capable of independent action powered down their weapons. Captains who had been hesitating, caught between Drayle's orders and the evidence of their own sensor readings, heard my broadcast and made their choice. One by one, then in clusters, then in waves, the Reshon Armada surrendered. Drayle moved toward me. His face was twisted with fury, the last refuge of a commander who had lost everything and could not accept it. "You are a traitor," he snarled. "I will have you executed on this bridge. Guard, remove this officer and prepare for immediate disciplinary action." He turned to the nearest crew members. None of them moved. They looked at Drayle, and then they looked at the tactical display where 150 warships drifted helplessly, while 2,000 human ships held position around them, patient and immovable. Then they looked at me. The senior weapons officer, a veteran named Korath who had served under 3 different Archons, stepped forward and placed his hand on Drayle's arm. "Sir," he said quietly, "it is over." Drayle tried to shake him off. 2 more officers stepped in and held the Archon firmly. His struggles lasted only a moment before the fight went out of him, and he sagged between them like a puppet whose strings had been cut. The airlock cycled again 20 minutes later. Captain Hargrove came aboard for the second time, accompanied by a squad of human soldiers in full combat armor, who moved with the quiet efficiency of professionals who had done this 1,000 times. They were large, even by human standards, and their armor was covered in equipment I could not identify. The soldiers took Drayle into custody without ceremony. Hargrove described it as command-level accountability for an unprovoked invasion, and her tone suggested that the humans had very specific and very serious protocols for dealing with military commanders who launched aggressive operations against their territory. When Drayle was gone, Hargrove turned to me. The hardness in her expression had not softened, but there was something else there now. Recognition, perhaps. The acknowledgement that in a fleet full of officers who had chosen pride or obedience, I had chosen the harder path. "Commander Sorn," she said, "Earth has not engaged in formal diplomatic contact with any outside species in over 2 centuries. What happened today may change that. Admiral Castillo wants to speak with you aboard our command vessel." "Why me?" I asked. Hargrove studied me for a moment. "Because you are the only officer in your fleet who looked at an impossible situation and decided to talk instead of shoot. That makes you the only one in this sector that we are interested in talking to." She paused, and for the first time, something that might have been a hint of warmth crossed her features. "And because we need to have a very honest conversation about what happens next, for your people and for ours." "What do you mean?" Hargrove's expression grew serious again. "Commander, we sealed ourselves away from the galaxy 2 centuries ago for a very specific reason. We did not do it because we were afraid of what the galaxy might do to us. We did it because we were afraid of what we might do to the galaxy." She met my eyes. "Your Archon just spent the last 18 hours trying to force that door open. He succeeded. And now humanity is standing on the threshold, deciding whether or not to step through. That decision is being made right now, in real time, and the outcome of this conversation will influence it more than you realize." I looked at the human soldiers standing in the corridor of my ship. I looked at the tactical display showing 2,000 warships holding perfect formation around the remains of our armada. I thought about the restraint they had shown, the precision, the absolute refusal to cause unnecessary harm, even when we had given them every justification to destroy us. And I understood what Hargrove was telling me. The door was open. What came through it would depend on what happened in the next few hours. "Take me to your admiral," I said. The shuttle that carried me to the human dreadnought cut through the void between the 2 fleets, and through the viewport, I saw the human warships up close for the first time. They were not beautiful in the way Reshan ships were beautiful. They were not elegant or streamlined, or decorated with the traditional hull engravings that our ship designers considered essential. They were functional. Every line, every angle, every surface was designed with a single purpose, and that purpose was clearly and unmistakably military. These ships had been built to fight. They had been built to win. And they had been built in numbers that suggested their builders had anticipated needing to win against very large enemies indeed. The dreadnought we approached was called the Carthage. I learned later that it was named after an ancient human city that had been destroyed in a war so long ago that it had passed from history into legend. The humans named their warships after places they had lost, battles they regretted, and mistakes they did not want to repeat. I found that detail more telling than anything I had seen on the tactical displays. The Carthage was enormous. As our shuttle glided into its docking bay, I realized that the bay itself was larger than the entire Kelvan's Wrath. The interior was cavernous, filled with rows of smaller craft, maintenance equipment, and the organized chaos of a vessel designed to operate independently for months or years at a time. When I stepped off the shuttle, I was greeted by a detail of human officers who escorted me through the interior of the ship, and this was where my understanding of humanity shifted in a way that no amount of tactical data could have achieved. I had expected a warship to look like a warship. I had expected bare corridors, harsh lighting, the utilitarian grimness of a vessel built for combat and nothing else. The Reshian approach to military ship design was simple and absolute. A warship existed to fight, and every square unit of interior space was dedicated to that function. The Carthage was not like that at all. The corridors were wide and well lit, with a warmth to the lighting that felt more like sunlight than artificial illumination. The walls were not bare metal. They were lined with panels of some material that softened sound and gave the passages an almost comfortable quality. And on those walls, everywhere I looked, there were personal touches. Art, photographs, images that the crew had pinned or attached or displayed in small frames beside their duty stations. I saw landscapes of a world I had never visited. Vast blue oceans, mountain ranges covered in white frozen precipitation, green expanses of vegetation stretching to distant horizons. I saw images of human families, adults and children posed together, with expressions of warmth and affection. I saw paintings in styles I did not understand, but which spoke of beauty and emotion and the inner life of beings who cared deeply about more than survival and war. Near one duty station, a collection of small, colorful drawings had been attached to the wall, at a height that suggested they had been made by very young children. Crude images of ships and stars and stick figures, rendered in bright colors with the enthusiastic imprecision of tiny hands. One of them had words written at the top in a human script I could not read, but the officer walking beside me noticed me looking and translated it quietly. "It says, 'Come home soon, Dad.'" I stared at that drawing, and something in my chest constricted painfully. These people had built warships powerful enough to end civilizations, vessels carrying weapons that could crack planets, and fleets that could darken entire star systems. And they had filled those ships with art and family photographs and children's drawings. They had planted gardens and hung personal images and created small spaces of beauty and warmth inside machines of war, because they refused to let the necessity of military power strip away the things that made them who they were. It was the most alien thing I had ever encountered, and it was also, impossibly, the most familiar. Because every species builds weapons out of fear, but only a species that cares deeply about what it is fighting for would take the time to hang a child's drawing next to a weapons console. Admiral Victor Castillo received me in a meeting room that overlooked the docking bay through a massive viewport. He was older than Hargrove, with deep lines in his face and gray hair cut close to his skull. His eyes were dark and quiet, and carried the specific weight of someone who had spent decades making decisions that determined whether people lived or died. He did not look like a conqueror. He looked tired. "Commander Sorn," he said, gesturing to a seat across the table from him. "Please sit down. We have a great deal to discuss, and I would prefer to do it as equals rather than as adversaries." Hargrove stood near the viewport, arms crossed, watching the exchange with alert, measuring eyes. Two other human officers sat at the table. One a young man with an open, intelligent face who I later learned was a diplomatic liaison named Owen Cross, and the other a woman, with close-cropped dark hair and a calm, assessing gaze, who introduced herself as Commander Claire Sutton, Castillo's chief tactical officer. Castillo began without preamble. "I am going to tell you our history, Commander. Not because I want sympathy or understanding, but because you need context for the decisions that are being made right now." He spoke for nearly 30 minutes, and I listened without interrupting. Humanity had reached the stars approximately 400 years ago. Their early expansion had been cautious and hopeful. They had believed, with what Castillo described as naive optimism, that contact with other intelligent species would lead to cooperation, trade, and mutual enrichment. They had been wrong. The first species they contacted attacked their colony ships without warning. The second demanded territorial concessions, under threat of orbital bombardment. The third launched a coordinated invasion of 3 human border systems simultaneously. Each time, humanity fought back, and each time they won. But the victories changed them. The first war lasted 2 years, and cost them 3 colony worlds. The second lasted 8 months, and ended when human forces developed weapons capable of collapsing the enemy's homestar. The third lasted 6 weeks, because humanity had become so efficient at warfare that they dismantled the invading fleet before it could reach its second objective. 3 wars in 40 years. 3 enemies defeated with increasing speed and decreasing mercy. By the end of the third conflict, human military technology had advanced so rapidly and so aggressively that their own scientists began raising alarms. They were developing weapons that no species should possess: planet killers, star eaters, devices that could tear holes in the fabric of space itself. And with each war, the political appetite for using those weapons grew stronger. We looked at what we were becoming, Castillo said quietly, and we did not like it. We were winning every fight, but each victory made us more willing to fight the next one, with less restraint. Our generals were developing strategies for preemptive annihilation. Our politicians were arguing for territorial expansion to create buffer zones. Our weapons designers were competing to build devices that could end not just wars, but entire civilizations. He paused. A coalition of military leaders, scientists, and civilian authorities forced a reckoning. They argued that if we continued on our trajectory, we would become the greatest threat the galaxy had ever seen. Not because we wanted to be, but because our nature, the same drive and aggression and adaptability that had carried us to the stars in the first place, would turn us into exactly the monsters our enemies believed we were. So you isolated yourselves, I said. We withdrew behind a defensive perimeter. We stopped all contact with outside species. We continued to advance our technology, but we directed that advancement inward, toward defense rather than offense. We built the most powerful military fleet in the galaxy, and then parked it in the dark, and told it to stand guard, and we waited. Waited for what? For someone to come knocking, who was worth opening the door for. Castillo's expression did not change, but something shifted in his eyes. In 200 years, every species that has crossed our perimeter has done so with weapons charged and hostile intent. Every single one. Your Archon is not the first to test us, Commander. He is simply the most recent. With the weight of those words settled over the room. 200 years of watching the galaxy from behind a wall, and every visitor had come armed and looking for a fight. I thought about how that must feel, how it must shape a people's view of the universe and their place in it. Every encounter confirming the fear that had driven them into isolation in the first place. Every hostile fleet validating the decision to hide. But you did not destroy our armada, I said. You could have. You demonstrated that capacity beyond any doubt. Why hold back? Castillo was quiet for a moment, then he said, because the restraint is the point, Commander. It is the entire point. Everything we built, every ship, every weapon, every defensive system, exists for one reason, so that we never have to become the thing we are capable of being. The moment we stop choosing restraint, we have lost. Not the battle, ourselves. He leaned forward slightly. Your armada fired on us. Your Archon lied to your government and fabricated an invasion. By any reasonable military doctrine, we would have been justified in destroying every ship in your fleet. We chose not to. We disabled your weapons and your engines, and we left your crews alive. That choice cost us more than you realize. There are voices in our command structure, right now, arguing that we should have made an example of your fleet. That restraint only invites future aggression, that the next fleet will be bigger. And what do you believe? I asked. Castillo looked at me with those quiet, tired eyes. I believe that the day we stop choosing restraint is the day we stop deserving the power we have. But I will be honest with you, Commander. That belief gets harder to hold on to every time someone forces us to have this conversation. The negotiation that followed was not between governments. Neither of us had the authority for that. It was between two officers who understood, perhaps better than their respective leaders, that the alternative to talking was a catastrophe that neither species could afford. I spoke on behalf of the Rishon captains who had chosen to stand down, the 40-plus commanders who had received my warning and acted on it, and the many others who had surrendered when they saw the reality of the situation. I did not speak for Drael. I did not speak for the Dominion's government. I spoke for the soldiers who had looked at an impossible situation and chosen survival over pride. I proposed a formal diplomatic channel between our peoples. Not an alliance, not a treaty of friendship, simply an open line of communication, a way for our governments to talk to each other without requiring one side to invade the other's space first. I proposed a mutual non-aggression framework, a basic agreement that neither species would threaten or attack the other without extreme provocation, with clear definitions of what constituted provocation so that there could be no repeat of Drael's manufactured incident. Castillo listened. He asked questions, he consulted with his officers, and then he raised the objection I had been expecting. Commander, I have spent my career dealing with species who promised peace and prepared war. I have seen non-aggression pacts, signed with great ceremony, and violated within a decade. How do you expect me to trust an agreement with a government whose own military officer lied to his command and launched an unsanctioned invasion? Because the officers who chose to stand down proved something today, I said. When they received my warning, they could have ignored it. They could have followed the Archon's orders and attacked alongside the rest of the fleet. They did not. They looked at the evidence, made their own assessment, and chose not to fight. Not every species will choose war, Admiral. Some of us will choose to listen. Castillo studied me for a long time. I could see the calculation in his eyes, the weighing of risk against possibility, the question of whether one officer's words were worth the gamble of opening a door that had been sealed for 2 centuries. It was Hargrove who spoke next. She had been silent throughout the negotiation, standing by the viewport with her arms crossed, watching. Now she stepped forward and addressed Castillo directly. Admiral, we have been behind that wall for 200 years. In that time, our technology has advanced beyond anything the galaxy can match. Our fleet is unassailable. Our defensive capabilities are absolute. We sealed ourselves away because we feared what we would become if we engaged with the galaxy. She paused, but isolation has its own cost. We have raised 3 generations of humans who have never spoken to anyone who was not human. We have brilliant scientists who have never collaborated with an alien mind. We have children who grow up believing that the universe beyond our border contains nothing but enemies. If that continues, Admiral, we will not need an outside threat to destroy us. We will do it ourselves, just like before. The room was silent. Castillo looked at Hargrove, then at me, then at his own hands resting on the table. I could see him thinking, could almost watch the decision forming behind his eyes. A preliminary accord, he said finally. Not a treaty, not an alliance. A framework for communication, with provisions for diplomatic exchange and a clearly defined process for escalation in the event of future incidents. And the understanding that this is conditional on the Reshan Dominion's government ratifying the agreement and holding Archon Kennis accountable for his actions. Agreed, I said. The handshake that followed was the first physical contact between a human and a Reshuan in recorded history. Castillo's hand was warm and strong, and his grip was firm without being aggressive. It was the grip of someone who was choosing, deliberately and consciously, to extend trust. After the accord was signed, Hargrove took me to a part of the Carthage I had not seen. It was a corridor deep in the ship's interior, wide and softly lit, and both walls were covered from floor to ceiling with names. Thousands of names, tens of thousands. They were engraved in the metal of the walls, each one rendered in precise, clear lettering that caught the light and held it. Every human soldier killed in the wars before the isolation, Hargrove said quietly. Every crew member, every Marine, every pilot who died fighting enemies who attacked us without provocation. She touched the wall gently, her fingertips resting on a cluster of names near eye level. Every human warship carries a wall like this. Every crew member walks past it every day. Every new recruit learns these names during their first week of service. I looked at the names stretching in every direction, more than I could count, and I understood something fundamental about the species I had spent this day encountering for the first time. It is a reminder, I said. It is a promise, Hargrove corrected me. A promise to the people on this wall that their deaths will not be wasted. That we will not become the thing that made those deaths necessary. She looked at me. That is why we hold back, Commander. Not because we are merciful. Not because we are kind. Because every human on this ship walks past these names every single day and remembers what happens when we stop holding back. I stood in that corridor for a long time, reading names I could not pronounce, belonging to people I would never know, who had died in wars that ended centuries before I was born. And I understood, with a clarity that I had never experienced before, that humans were not dangerous because of their weapons. They were not dangerous because of their technology, or their fleet, or their impossible tactical precision. They were dangerous because they knew, with absolute and unflinching honesty, exactly what they were capable of, and they chose, every single day, to be something better. That choice was the most powerful thing I had ever witnessed, more powerful than the dreadnoughts, more powerful than the weapons that could erase plasma bolts from existence, more powerful than 2,000 warships holding formation around a defeated armada. The choice to hold back, to restrain the very nature that had made them the most formidable species in the galaxy, was the foundation upon which everything else was built. The Rashan fleet was repaired by human engineering teams over the following 2 days. They moved through our ships with casual expertise, fixing damage that would have taken our own shipyards months to address. They were friendly. They joked with our engineers, answered questions about their tools, and showed genuine curiosity about Rashan technology, even as they repaired it with methods our scientists could not begin to understand. The contrast between their warmth as individuals and their terrifying efficiency as a military force was something I could not reconcile, and I eventually stopped trying. His return to Rashan custody to face a Dominion tribunal. He left the Carthage in restraints, silent and hollow-eyed, a broken officer who had gambled his fleet and his career on the assumption that the myths were just stories. I did not feel satisfaction watching him go. I felt pity. He had been arrogant, yes, and reckless, and his actions had nearly caused the destruction of 300 ships and the deaths of tens of thousands of crew members. But he had also been operating on the same assumption that every Rashan officer had operated on for centuries. Humans do not exist. The silence is empty. There is nothing out there to fear. He had been wrong. We had all been wrong. As the Rashan fleet prepared to depart, I stood on the bridge of the Kelvan's Wrath and looked out through the main viewport at the human armada. They held formation in perfect silence, 2,000 warships arranged in a pattern that was both mathematically precise and strangely beautiful. Their hulls caught the light of distant stars and reflected it back in shades of silver and gray, and their running lights blinked in sequences that created a slow, rhythmic pulse across the entire formation. I activated my personal log and began recording my official report to Dominion Command. I spoke clearly and carefully, choosing every word with the understanding that this report would shape my government's response to the most significant discovery in Rashan history. I described the encounter in detail. I described the technology we had witnessed. I described the restraint the humans had shown, the precision of their response, and the deliberate choice they had made to disable rather than destroy. I described the conversation with Admiral Castillo and the preliminary accord we had reached. I described the memorial wall aboard the Carthage and what it represented. And then, I addressed the question that I knew every official who read this report would be asking: are the humans a threat? The answer was complicated, and I did not simplify it. The humans were the most dangerous species I had ever encountered. Their technology was centuries beyond ours. Their military capability was absolute. If they chose to wage war against the Rashan Dominion, or against any power in the galaxy, the outcome would not be in doubt. They would win. They would win quickly, decisively, and comprehensively, and there was nothing any of us could do to prevent it. But they did not choose war. They chose isolation. They chose restraint. They built the most powerful fleet in the galaxy, and then sealed it behind a border, and hoped that nobody would come looking. They hung their children's drawings on the walls of their warships, and tended gardens between weapons drills, and walked past the names of their dead every single morning as a reminder of what they did not want to become. The old myths were wrong, not because humans did not exist, but because the stories made them sound like monsters. The truth was far more complicated and far more terrifying. Humans were not monsters. They were people who understood, with a depth of self-awareness that I found almost painful to contemplate, that they carried the capacity for monstrous things inside them, and they had built their entire civilization around the commitment to never let that capacity loose again. They were the most dangerous species in the galaxy, not because of what they did, but because of what they chose not to do. And that choice, that daily, deliberate, exhausting choice to be better than their nature demanded, was the single most impressive achievement I had ever witnessed in my career as a military officer. I ended my report with a single recommendation. I worded it carefully, because I knew that the officials who read it would be tempted to interpret the human restraint as weakness, to see the choice not to destroy us as evidence that they could not. I needed them to understand, in terms so clear that even the most hawkish politician could not misread them, that the restraint was not a flaw, it was a gift. And it was not one that would be offered twice. My recommendation was 5 words long, and I spoke them into the recording with all the weight and conviction I could muster. Do not make them come to us. I ended the log, turned off the recorder, and stood at the viewport as the fleet began its long journey home. Behind us, the human armada held its silent vigil, 2,000 warships guarding a border that they hoped no one would ever cross again. And somewhere deep inside those ships, in corridors lined with the names of the dead and the drawings of children, a species that had chosen to be a myth was deciding whether the time had come to become real again. I hoped, for the sake of both our peoples, that when they stepped out of the silence, they would find a galaxy ready to meet them not with weapons, but with open hands. But I was not naive enough to count on it. So I included one final note in my report, unofficial and off the record, addressed to no one in particular and everyone at once. They are watching. They have always been watching. And if we give them a reason to stop being patient, the stories our children tell about the darkness beyond the border will no longer be myths. They will be history,